Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Watch Your Six. I'm Jason Edwards, your host, and we have been delighted by the response we've got from individuals. A lot of great questions have come across our board. And again, our hope is always to try to provide you information. We're not necessarily here to sell you, and that's unusual for sales and particularly social media. But what we want to do is make sure that the data and the information that the incredibly wealthy have access to, or those that are truly successful, you as an individual, regardless of your bandwidth or your financial status, can utilize this information and grow. And it's really critical that we inform you. One of the things we do with our clients, whether they're multimillionaires or individuals just starting out, is we try to educate them along the way. Now, in our industry, we have a propensity to over talk or talk over someone's head and be very, very articulate. And that really has a tendency to make situations seem hard for an average individual to understand. And then what happens is, honestly, they just don't want to ask questions because they don't want to seem like they don't know what's going on. So they just sit quiet, and then the situation continues to metastasize. And over time, those individuals lose trust in the process or lose trust in the mission or the objective. So one of the biggest things we touch on when we try to work with our clients, whether it's a large estate, whether it's trust work, whether it's financial planning work, whether it's investment growth or management work or economic growth of a company, is education as it relates to simplifying the process so that you as an individual can understand it. So I thought with our opening monologue today, we would talk about the basic fundamentals of why, even though you're working hard, even though you're struggling and you're doing everything you're reading about from this book or that entity, you're not being successful. More importantly, you're not being able to create wealth. So I'm going to sort of give you 7 talking points and things that I think are critical for you to understand what works against you when it comes to success. And I think it's very important because then you know how to address it. Now, we try to stay out of the political realm, but the reality of it is in the last 3 or 4 years, our inflation has been through the roof. Now, inflation is a fancy term for cost of things. And everyone out there, regardless of your background, know things have gone up in cost. Now, the problem is if things have continually skyrocket or go up in cost, your wages haven't gone up at that level. In fact, it's almost impossible for any company to keep giving you a raise of 10 to 8% a week or a year or a month to try to mitigate some of the impacts of inflation. So you've got wages that are maybe slowly going up, and then you've got the cost of living that's skyrocketing and is multiplying yearly. That in itself is probably one of the biggest hurdles to becoming financially successful or building wealth or managing your company's growth. You think about housing, education, childcare, the list goes on and on. All those things cost and resources are needed to dedicate to those assets. But if your portfolio or your income level, wherever it's coming from, isn't keeping up with those costs, you're just making ends meet. So that's one of the biggest things we see. Now, another thing we see, unfortunately, is a lack of financial education. In our school systems today, they don't really teach a lot on money management. They don't give you guidance on credit, investing, taxes, evaluating job situations, how to perform for a job interview. None of the financial aspects of being truly successful are really taught at the basic school level. And so what happens is you've got a dynamic where you're making financial decisions and you're sort of winging it. You don't have the intellectual resources because they didn't teach you that. And then you don't know who to talk to, where to go, and how to gather that. And that's the biggest thing we see with anybody, particularly those entrepreneurs, individuals that I know you're listening to me on these podcasts. You started a company maybe the first time and it didn't necessarily take off as well as you thought, or you found yourself in a financial situation or legal situation because you didn't know what you didn't know. So knowledge is probably one of the biggest things next to the cost of living that impacts your ability to grow. And I think it's important you understand that, because sometimes we can be hard on ourselves and say, well, I'm just not working hard enough. And that may not be the case. There may be other variables like we touched on now that can impact you. Now, third thing that really impacts you is bad debt, or what we call bad interest on debt. So you have credit cards, and the credit cards typically will highlight that you have maybe a spending challenge. So you get a little money and you see something you like, you go ahead and buy it. Well, now what happens is you're trapped in a cycle. What does that mean? Well, the debt continues to charge interest. So it's almost like you're making new purchases every month. And now that debt continues to snowball. And what happens is it slows down your ability to have access to cash that you now can invest. And that's a big deal. And I always hear that over and over and over. Most people who are financially successful may have some debt, but the bulk of the things they utilize or buy are purchased with their funds. They're not leveraging those debts. They're not purchasing and then trying to borrow against something. So those are another issue that we see consistently. Now, another one is no leverage of ownership. So if you think about it, when you own something, let's say you own a property or you own a company or you have some type of scalable income, those assets that you own, they are resources that you can now use, and those resources can be used for you to minimize or maximize your debt. So what you're able to do is you're able to now to build off that resource and make sure that you're able to now use that asset in a proper way. When you don't own anything, you have nothing to use. If everything you own is simply rent, so you're renting a car, you're renting a house, you don't really have your own business, you don't have the property you live in, you don't have any assets coming from any kind of income source, what would you leverage when you want to grow up or scale up? Not much. So those are one of the biggest challenges we see. Another one we see is what we call systematic barriers. To be frank, generation wealth does help some individuals. It is traditionally a lot easier if you have $2, $3, $4, $5 million to make another million or $2 million. It's more challenging if you had nothing to begin with. So generation wealth and systematic barriers, maybe where you live, what part of the world you live, maybe the financial resources aren't there because geographically you're in a scenario that you're somewhat limited. Those are all variables. Maybe you're selling a product that doesn't work in your area, but works in another area. So for example, trying to sell ice in Alaska may not be as lucrative as selling ice in the South American countries. So those are things that we always highlight when we look at a business strategy or a business plan to ensure that there aren't barriers that we can avoid. Another one, and this is a big one, is emotional spending. Now, unfortunately, with the world we live in today, it's full of stress and it's full of anxiety. And you're sitting here looking at your phone right now, or you're listening to your podcast and you're doing it, but possibly have 2 or 3 other things on your mind right now while you're listening to me, which means that your emotions have a huge impact on your psychology. And one of the biggest challenges is what we call short-term thinking. What does that mean? Well, a lot of people will say, I work hard, I deserve this, I need it now. They don't sit back and say, okay, I don't necessarily need this. Maybe putting this purchase off for a year or two will put me in a better situation. And particularly after tragedies, that's another area where people go, well, yeah, I never going to happen tomorrow, so I'm going to buy it now. And I understand the philosophy, but again, we're talking about things that are hurdles to success financially. And emotional spending, or what we call survival mode, is critical. You have to readjust your thinking. If you're in survival mode all the time, meaning you're always panicked, you're always worried, you're always feeling anxiety, you're always worrying about the next thing, you never focus on growth. All you focus on is today. And while that sounds like a fundamental strategy, it's not fundamentally sound when it comes to future wealth. Remember, we're talking about building something that can allow you to sustain not just today, but next week, next month, next year, and even your family if you have children, wives, etc. So those are a dynamic that we want to be looking at. How emotional are you when it comes to your spending? How emotional are you when it comes to your thought process in life? If you're a scenario where you're feeling like, you know what, I don't care, tomorrow's tomorrow, I'm just going to spend it now, I can assure you, barring some massive influx of capital from a lottery, an inheritance, or something, you're never going to be successful financially. You're just not, because you created an own barrier that you're going to be hammered with. And that sort of leads into the next strategy. Something to help you really determine, are you looking at it fiscally correct or you're looking at it emotionally, is having a plan. We talk about this all the time. No strategic plan. Now remember, hard work without clear, measurable goals will accomplish nothing. If I go in my backyard and I just run around cutting this and trimming that, but I don't have a picture in mind, I don't know what I'm going to try to do. Am I going to put flowers here, build a hedge? Am I going to do a deck? I'm just running around doing things. I'm staying busy, but am I accomplishing anything? Same when it comes to financial success. Without tracking, without optimizing, without adjusting, hard work simply becomes a reaction, not proactive. We don't want to be reactive. We don't want to simply put in hard work and energy, but have no mission objective or mission goal. And again, watch your 6. That's the premise of our philosophy. You have to have individuals identify for you what you're missing. Where are you deficient? What are areas that maybe you're, falling down on? And we encourage you, if you want, DM us, email us. We'd love to have your questions on the show. You're welcome to call our firm and get some information directly. But again, without that optimization or tracking, you're really just buying things or investing, and you really have no goal. Don't get caught in the rut of just hopping on TV or listening to somebody talk for 4 seconds and pick the stock or buy that bond or pick this mutual fund without really doing your due diligence and having all the information. We call it suitability. We have to create a plan that is suitable to you, the individual. But to do that, you have to be able to design a plan that helps you combine hard work, financial literacy, leveraging, strategic thinking, and sometimes a mind shift, or what we call a mindset shift, changing how you view wealth. How do you view savings? How do you view assets? I can't tell you how many times individuals come in and talk to us, and they meet with me, and they come in and they've got a lot of debt, they've spent a lot of money, they have a lot of assets, and they wonder why they're sort of illiquid. They still seem cash going out the door, and we'll come up with a strategy. And less than 2 minutes after the meeting, go, that's great. But this next month, I want to do this big trip I do every year. But after that, I'll implement it. Now, what do you think the likelihood, if they're not willing to change their mind at this meeting, that after this next big trip, there won't be another big trip? There won't be another thing they need to purchase, and then they'll do it. There won't be another issue that they want to overcome and spend money on, and then they'll do it. What do you think the chances of that happening are? They're pretty high. That's because, again, remember, the only person driving your ship is you. And you're the one that has the control on what to do and how to manage and mitigate some of the challenges. So hopefully that gives you some food for thought. Today we want to talk a little bit about some keys to being successful. Sort of fits in line with our monologue. And then we're going to go back to our DMs and answer some questions. Now, one of the keys we found, and we're going to give you 5, one of the keys we found is living below your means. What does that mean? Well, spend less than you earn. Sounds very basic, right? Spend less than you earn and avoid lifestyle inflation. We talked about lifestyle inflation in previous podcasts, you remember. We discussed the cost of things and how your lifestyle inflation is not the cost of goods. It's the propensity to spend more money as you make more money. Well, now what we're saying is flip that, reverse it. Say for example, what do I make? And budget carefully and maintain 10 or 20% below what you make. So if you have a volume number, let's say it's $4,000 a month, $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month, $1 million a month, and you're saying, okay, I'm only going to spend 80 or 70 to 65% of that, you are now creating a buffer. That is going to create a level of wealth, right? It's going to avoid unnecessary debt. Unnecessary debt is debt that you don't necessarily have to incur. So to illustrate, you heard this probably from your families growing up, mom or dad, eat at home, it's cheaper. Well, some things are true. Do you have to go to Starbucks every morning? Again, I'm not bad-mouthing any coffee company. I'm just saying as an example. Is there ways maybe you skip other days, every other day, and eat coffee at home? Well, that's $6 to $7 a purchase times 5. Now you're looking at $30, $35 a week that maybe you could be saving, right? That slowly starts to snowball. There also create what we call financial breathing room. One of the biggest reasons individuals get on debt is because they have no resources when something happens. Car breaks down, tire gets flat, roof leaks. They look in their bank account, man, I shouldn't have gone to those movies. I shouldn't have gone out to eat. I shouldn't have bought those extra shirts I didn't really need. I would have had cash, but I don't. So I got to pay for it. What do? Credit card. And then what happens? Well, now your ability to be financially successful has been diminished. So step 1, live below your means. Now, you got to understand, this is a temporary solution. If you're living below your means and you successfully save money, 3 or 4 years, you may be living at a different level. So your means may be now from $4,000 a month in income, you're now at $10,000 a month in resources coming in. So you're below your means could still mean you're very wealthy and very successful and living very nice. Now, number 2, save and invest consistently. You work very hard. You spend a lot of energy doing whatever it is you're doing, right? And then you take all those resources, and the first person you're paying is a utilities company, or the car company, or a bank, or a credit card company. Now, are any of those individuals more important than you? No. You're the one making the money for them. So who should you pay first? Yourself. So creating a monthly systematic savings strategy where every month something's coming out of a bank account going into something else, that's you paying yourself. Every dollar I make, I take 10 cents. Every dollar I make, I take 20 cents. By paying yourself and doing it automated, meaning some type of ACH or some type of automated draft, you're taking that money out of your hands. It's not getting spent. You're also creating your own budget, right? Remember, we go back to the first step. So if I know I make $10,000 a month, $1 million a month, and I take 10% out and pay that to myself, well, I've paid me. I put the money to the side for me, right? So now I paid the most important person in my pay group, and now I take care of the rest. So that's critical. It's a great way to diversify across assets. You can take some of that money, put in some of your stocks, your bonds, your saving, your checking, whatever. But paying yourself first is critical because that allows you to create true wealth, and it allows you to maximize the hard work you're putting in. Build multiple income sources is another challenge. So most successful individuals, if you've ever had a chance to talk to anybody with a lot of wealth, they usually have more than one way of income coming into their house, right? So they have a job, a business maybe, they invested in an entity, they've got income coming from another source, a rental, etc. Creating some type of alternative income is a financial freeze easier when money works for you. So that's even investing. Remember, the reason you're investing is you're trying to maximize what you've put into something while you are working. So over here, just use your dollars, for example. If they're invested and they're making 10, 15, 20 cents a dollar, that's a pay raise. And you've done nothing for that. You're still working, you're still putting money, but that's income. Or let's say you have a secondary house that you don't always need, so you do an Airbnb. That's income. Or let's say somebody comes to you with business potential, you do your due diligence, you look at it, it's a sound thing, you write them a check and you get into the investment. There's income coming from that. That's income. Creating these kind of passive income streams or these multiple income streams is critical to really creating, because remember, there's only so many hours in a day. And if you're working 12 hours, you got to sleep, you got to eat. And that's the money you're getting paid while you're working per hour, you're getting compensated, then you've capped out your earning potential. So creating alternate income streams or multiple income streams is a great way to create success. Now, the problem with all of these things is that number 4 really hurts them, and that's debt. We'll talk about debt a lot. But managing your debt, use credit cards as a tool, not as a trap. What do I mean? Well, you may have a company and you need to acquire some assets for the company, and you've got the cash on hand, but you've got a credit card with great point system, and you can pay it off. You might use that as a tool. Let me get those assets. I'll pay the credit card off. We get the points back to the company, and then I'm able to get the assets and write off the deduction, et cetera, et cetera. That's a tool. But if you are basically broke at the end of the month, you've kept your budget, you're very strict, you hop online and you see something you always wanted, or you see 2 of something, they're on sale, even though I can't afford the 2, they're cheaper, so I'll buy 2. That's a trap. That's where you're using the credit card the way it should not be utilized. And now what happens is you keep credit card in a scenario where now you're in a dynamic where you're getting hammered. So first things, I would pay off the highest debt or the highest interest rate debt that you have first. I would look to chip that down very quickly. If you got debt at 20, 30% APR, you want those paid off. And then what you want to do is keep your credit utilization low and maintain a good credit score. Credit score is going to be critical because things are going to cost less if and when you try to buy them using credit. And it's sort of a cycle that helps you build your wealth. So again, debt is probably one of the biggest Achilles that we see on a regular basis, and one of the challenges that we see all the time for individuals. And it's really a systemic flaw. It's more prevalent in countries that are very successful because we think, well, the credit card's there, but I've got a job, so I'll pay it off next week. I'll pay it off next week. And now that debt becomes a snowball effect. And last but not least, plan with purpose. We talked about that in the beginning of our monologue. What are you doing and why? Ask yourself, I work at a certain job. What's the purpose? It's not the job, because I'm not going to work here my whole life. I get up, I work very hard, but what's the purpose? Is the purpose so that I can have the ability to have things debt-free, have some freedom with my family, spend times on the weekends helping philanthropically, helping organizations, my church, etc.? Is the freedom to be able to do things and not be impacted financially or physically? Is that the purpose? Have a clear purpose, because the clear purpose helps you have a visual aid to doing what's right. Now, first of all, you have to make sure you have both short-term and long-term goals, objectives identified, right? So remember, we always talk on this show, first short-term, have at least 3 to 6 month emergency savings on hand. Maybe that's your first plan. First purpose, this money I'm putting away, I want it in a savings account. I don't want it touched. I don't want it invested. I want 3 to 6 month savings there for me. If something were to happen to my job or income stream, I can put it away. Then once you achieve what we call your short-term goal, then you go to your long-term goals. Those goals can be homes, retirement, businesses, etc. But you want to make sure you have that written down. Now, a lot of times people lack the self-discipline to sit down and write their goals. And that's critical. So if you have a planning team or a firm or whatever, even if it's multiple layers, you've got an estate attorney, you've got a CPA, tax counsel, you've got your financial planning institution group, have them all get together with you and really put something on paper. So that way you're more consolidated. You really can see where you're going. It also will help you identify some of the holes or gaps. You know, we've talked in previous shows about entrepreneurs starting business entities. They got great concepts and they walk themselves into a bad contract or a bad relationship, and financially you're impacted dramatically. Or you've got individuals that say, you know what, I'm going to take this new job. It sounds great, but again, they don't know what they don't know. Without looking at it correctly and really assessing all the dynamics, you can walk into something that ends up being worse, not better. So those 5 things we want you to remember when it comes to financial success. Hopefully you'll find those useful, and hopefully in future shows you'll be able to discuss with us a little bit more some of the components you like. Now, we're going to go to our phones and we're going to look at our DMs rather, and we are going to answer some questions from our viewers. So Grady, what do you got?
I got this guy from Instagram. He's saying he makes the same amount of money, but prices have gone up and the money he puts into savings is getting thinner. How can he keep saving for retirement?
So that's a good question that goes into what we talked about. There's 2 components. There's inflation and there's also lifestyle inflation. So you want to ask yourself, while you're saving for retirement and prices keep going up, are you still buying things you don't need? That's the first question, right? Determine, are there things you're buying that maybe you're buying too much of or could buy a little less of? Remember, we talked earlier in our podcast about living below your means. Second component is how those assets are invested. So if those investments are not performing up to market conditions, you could be giving up growth, and that growth will minimize, right? Minimize the potential of those funds, so you won't have as much as you thought you would have to keep up with inflation. So I would have, an investment group take a look maybe at your investment strategy, see how they're set up. But again, overspending, poor performance are probably 2 of the biggest things that would push against that. But hold the line. Don't give up on that saving strategy, even if you think things look a little lean, because the alternative is you spend all those assets and you have nothing.
Grace on YouTube said, my sister offered to pay for my kid's private school. Do I have to write off her paying that in my taxes?
So that's a great question that we're going to defer to your tax counsel, because we don't want to give that information. We don't know anything about your taxable situation. But traditionally, the individual paying for the asset is the only one that has access to the deduction. So again, we're telling you, maybe talk to your CPA or EA about that. But when it comes to individuals giving you gifts, some things that we like when it comes to that is maybe setting up a 529 and letting her put money into the 529 to pay for schooling for your children. That's a great way that she can have that asset out of her estate, and it can go into something that's tax sheltered until she uses it for school. That may be a better strategy, but once again, strongly recommend talk to your tax counsel on that specific question.
Thanks, Jason. Let me see, another DM we got. He says, I have lots of property, but very little day-to-day income. He sounds house poor here. What loans can he take out to help pay my bills without selling one of my properties?
So this is the biggest mistake people make when it comes to real estate growth. They become what we call house rich but cash poor. They're illiquid. And I really caution people every time they run into this scenario, because this is not unusual. What happens is now you're basically one tenant away from foreclosure. You've got all these houses. They're basically just covering the cost, or they're covering the nut, so to speak, for the mortgage, and you have nothing in your pocket. So if 2 tenants bail, or the real estate market takes a contraction like it did back in 08, 09, what happens is now you may have to short sell these houses. You may have to get rid of them below market value. So first and foremost, I would look at your cash flow. If you're in a situation where your cash flow and you're very limited, you may have to sell one of the properties I would look at a primary residence sale. Primary residence sale meaning the one you live in and then maybe move to a new property. The reason for that is that most states have a huge deduction on the capital gain. So you can sell that asset and not pay taxes on the income. But if that's what you're not leaning for, then you're looking at home equity lines or cash out plans. The problem is you're creating debt. And I'm a big advocate against that. Most financial successful individuals will tell you debt's a horrible scenario. There are a lot of wealthy individuals, actually talking heads, I call them, that were in scenarios where they became bankrupt because of debt. Now they advocate against it. So I don't necessarily think leveraging one of your properties would be good. I think what you really want to look at is ensuring that most of your personal money is not tied up in fixed assets like that because of what you're experiencing. Hopefully that gives you some guidance.
I got another comment from YouTube. Nicole saying she's living below her means. She really likes the show. What's a great benchmark where she can go on a nice vacation? She says, I love traveling. I just don't want to overspend.
So that's a good question. So first, do we have 3 to 6 months of funds in a bank, in a savings account, protecting against a loss of job? Make sure that's there. That's first. Second, are you putting 10 to 12% of your assets, your money, your paycheck every week towards retirement, towards future goals? If those two things are being addressed, then there should be a third account. That should be what I call the pre-retirement account. Money's going in, it's invested, and it's used for those kind of things. Look at how large that pre-retirement account has gotten. So then you can use it as a budget. So what do I mean? Let's say you have $10,000 invested, and this year that $10,000 made $2,000. Well, you could use that $2,000, which is interest, not your money, right, for vacation. So you back into the vacation based on the money that's available for that resource. Hopefully that helps. Great questions.
That's it for today, Jason.
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for tuning in to Watch Your Six. We hope to see you next week. Again, send those DMs, send those emails. We love answering your questions on air. And thank you for everything you do here at Watch Your Six. My name is Jason Edwards, and I'll see you next week.